Welcome to the Deal Flow podcast. This week, we're going to be reviewing a few deals. Okay, great. All right. So the first deal we have up for today is in South Carolina, particularly in Columbia. This is a growing area, a modestly growing area, limited vacant units in that 1, 3, and 5 mile radius. Average household income is just around our minimums, but the household value here is relatively low. So it's a pretty affordable place to live, pretty affordable place to buy a property. So based on that, it's not highly desirable, just based on lack of a moat from a rental perspective. Schools are just below our minimums. So far, we want to see 5s and 6s on the minimum. These are 4s, borderline. And so if we go to the actual deal, this particular deal was one that was done in 2021 during the peak of the market. Just going back to the vintage here, this is a 2000s vintage, so a newer property. And if I go to, so they bought this for almost $170,000 a unit, but that was only $125 a square foot, given the larger footprint of the units. However, given the demographics of this property and the vintage, this is probably not a great fit. There is a large value add opportunity here, almost $400 per unit. So there's definitely a great opportunity for someone there. Pretty big increase in taxes expected at the sale. South Carolina does have pretty high taxes. Insurance is reasonable in this market, so that's good. But overall, we're looking at almost $10,000 per unit in expenses, which is pretty expensive. Now, of course, it is a newer vintage property and you do have higher rents in this area given that vintage, but given the incomes in the area, getting to what is even $140 a square foot and $1,800 in rent, there's a very limited number of people in this area that are going to be able to afford that, right? Because again, our average income here is $50,000 to $60,000. So we're looking at probably only the top 10 or 20% of households who can afford to live in this property. That's really goes outside of our demographic. We want to be in workforce housing, renters by necessity, families who are going to stay long term. This is, I think, an opportunity for a different type of shop that's more focused on a different avatar. So also cash on cash in year one is below our minimums. So it's about 4%. On average, it looks okay. Equity check is between $8 to $10 million. That's consistent with what we're looking for. But all in all, given demographics, vintage, and just affordability concerns for the tenant, the average tenant in this area, this is something we'd have to pass on for now. But we will make an offer at what we feel is a reasonable price. However, that's going to be somewhere around 80 cents on the dollar relative to what they're looking at. So. Now we're going to go over to Alabama. This property is about an hour from some of our other assets near Birmingham. Income is strong, $80,000 to $100,000 income, low unemployment, good, strong population growth, over 2% a year over the last 5 years. But it is a small market. We're talking less than 2,000 households in the 1 mile radius and about 15,000 households in the postal code. Median household value is between $150,000 and $200,000. So okay, it's about 3 times the income. So that's about benchmark for what we're talking about here. This particular property though is under 100 units, which typically will fall outside of our benchmark. We really want to be at 100 or even 150 units or more. Much harder to operate properties of this size from a payroll perspective and just an asset management perspective as well. Overall, in addition to that, the going in cap rate is relatively low, below what I would expect a property of this size. The expenses for the existing owner, which is pretty typical for properties of this size, he's not running any payroll on site or very limited amounts of payroll on site, which was probably not something we'd be able to execute on. He's running the property, or the current owner's running the property at roughly $4,500 per unit. We would be over $6,000 a unit. So that really hurts our ability to be competitive on this deal. Then otherwise, if I look at some sales comps here, we do have some okay sales comps, but they're all over the place depending on size and we only have one property of similar vintage This is a 90s property, and we only have one property that is a 90s build. It sold for about $90 a square foot, and that was 2 years ago. So not a lot of comps to stick your head out on. So valuation is a little bit of a challenge, but I would say given its size and the fact that it's in a small market, it definitely should be in the 6.5 cap range or higher going in. Right now, I think they're looking for something south of a 5 cap, but of course that is still based on the fact that we've adjusted our expenses pretty significantly. So maybe that's understating what they view as the going in cap rate. Their going in cap rate is maybe, still pretty much the same. Something around 5.5. I think it needs to be about 6.5, which is about a 20% delta. We'll make an offer on this property, but for some of those reasons, mostly size, we're going to be about 20 cents off. So we'll be offering somewhere around 80 cents on the dollar relative to their ask. So that'll be that. All right, so next one, we're going to be going to North Carolina, in particular Greensboro. This is a good market. Definitely one where we want to take a closer look. This is a 2010, late 2000s vintage, good asset. I'm going to get good insurance quotes here. Sits alongside of a major highway, but with some green space. So that can be seen as an attractive for eyeballs going past the property. There is an affordability component to this property as well as potential tax abatement. We typically try not to forecast or assume that we're going to get the tax abatements just because they can change on a moment's notice, which recently happened in Texas, and a lot of people have now had to deal with properties that they thought they were going to have tax abatements, and they're going to exit their properties without that abatement. It's going to affect valuation by 10-20%. So I got to be careful about making those assumptions. Occupancy here is a little bit weak, especially given the size. It's only 100 to 150 units. In-place rent is relatively low. This is probably related to the affordability component. We typically do not operate properties that are affordable. But in the cases of properties where the income in the area is such that we can naturally provide affordability and we're not limited, then it's really not that big of a deal. And that's the case in this particular property. We are able to essentially rent to anyone in the area based on this income threshold. It should be fine based on the rents that I'm seeing here. We're also looking at the max rents based on the income units are well within our parameters for what we would charge for market anyway. Not a lot of issues related to affordability there. And then otherwise, looking at some of our underwriting, this was also a deal that was purchased in 2021, but it was done at a relatively reasonable price, probably due to the affordability component of the deal. A lot of people will not do affordable deals, so there limits the liquidity pool, and it wasn't as aggressive back in 2021 with sponsors looking to do deals like that. However, when I look at this particular property and I look at what we want to buy for, the ask price here is well in excess of what we're able to pay. There's a good value add as well. Even with the affordability component, we're looking at almost a $200 lift from current rents to target rents. Average square footage per unit is a little bit over 1,000 square feet per unit, which is a great size. And otherwise, given that this is also a mom and pop owner, the expenses are a little bit out of whack. Looks like payroll is running at $700 a unit, which is essentially impossible. So either they're not, and that may be one of the reasons why they're only 89% occupied. It's really hard to keep a property occupied when you have what looks like maybe one person operating the property. And if I look at the R&M here, R&M looks a little high. I would imagine they're probably outsourcing R&M to some extent, which is why their R&M is high and then their payroll is low, and also their occupancy is low. And other than that, I like the deal itself. I just don't know that we're going to be able to get to the price. We're somewhere in the neighborhood of $100K a unit on this property, which is around what the prior owner bought it for. And not too dissimilar from a lot of other deals that we see that were purchased in 2021, that it's very hard for people who want to sell deals that bought them in 2021 to clear their basis. So I like the deal at basically the seller's basis. as we have it in here right now, 90 to 100 bucks a square foot with about a $2 million value add budget. And going in year one cash flow is a little bit below our target, 4.5%, but there may be a little bit of room to squeeze out of the year one rents that we're not currently considering. But for now, we'll just put in our first bid. We're way under, we're almost 30% below their ask. I wouldn't be shocked if we do not get a response, but that's no problem. We'll just keep on making offers until we get the right deal that makes sense for us. All right, now we're gonna go to Northern Atlanta. This is a great market, good submarket. In this particular 1 mile radius, this is an affordable deal by deed or by income. So in this 1 mile radius, we do see lower incomes than the 3 and the 5 mile. That's usually a yellow flag for us, but it does make sense given that it is an affordable deal. It does still meet our minimum threshold of a roughly $55,000 to $60,000 average household income, but it is about 20 or 30% lower than the income on the 3 mile radius. So it's something we'll be considering. Population growth has been positive. Unemployment is below the national average, and the school districts are okay. Not as good as I would have expected given the area, but they do on average clear our threshold with roughly a 6 out of 10 for great schools. Otherwise, looking at this property, this is a 70s vintage property, over 300 units. All in all, this is going to be well in excess of our capacity to acquire, given the equity requirements, probably somewhere north of 25 million. And this property is currently transitioning from affordability, which may allow them to increase their rents, but going to 14, even going to $1,500 or $1,600 rents is going to be relatively difficult for the tenant base here. And imagine you're going to have the person who buys this property is going to have to turn over a lot of the units, because probably a good percentage of the people who live in this property aren't going to be able to afford that bump. It's only about $100 increase based on the value add, and there's about a $4 million budget here. We're looking at an ROI on a renovation of about 19%, which is okay, but that is not yet diluted by some of the other capex that we'll have to do with the property. It just considers the rent bumps. So given its size, it's out of our equity requirement or equity ability. This is probably something that, of course, we will make an offer on, but it's not likely something that we're going to be pursuing heavily just because we cannot perform at this size, nor do I really like this pocket of the northern Atlanta suburbs, given some of the income concerns. I prefer areas in the northern suburbs that have much higher household values, much higher incomes. Typically, we see $350,000 household values in the northern suburbs, with areas that we do like to see so far as Atlanta. And with that, I think that covers it, and we'll get an offer in. It looks like somewhere in the 85 cents in the dollar range versus what their ask is. Okay. All right, so the next one here, last one for today, will be in Middle Georgia. This is in a property that's nearby one of our other properties. It's currently being marketed, and it's a little bit outside of our ability so far as size. This is between 200 and 300 units, 2010s vintage. There's a minimal value add here. This is more of a cash flow play, it looks like. Income in the area is right around the borderline for what we're looking for. In this particular 1 mile radius, we're below the threshold, and certainly the household value as well. So we want to make sure that if this was a property we were interested in, that we were being very careful around the rents, and that this is a very affordable place to live relative to making a decision to just live in a house nearby, or rent house, or buying a house. This particular owner purchased the property back in 2018 for about 110 bucks a square foot. Again, this is a 2010s vintage, so that's a good price per square foot, but this is a tertiary market, so that's not uncommon to see that price point. Good yield going into this deal, over an 8% yield day one, at least at our price, at the price that they wanted at. we're looking at over a 6% yield going in, again above our threshold, but given the size of given the market, we would expect that we would get a 6 or 7% yield out of the gate here versus perhaps another more primary or secondary market. We may be willing to accept a 5% going in cash on cash in year one, as long as our average cash on cash was looking good. It looks like we're probably gonna be able to run this property no better, no worse from an expense perspective than the current owner. And there's not, as I had said previously, much of a value add here. It's very difficult to imagine how we would be able to hit our return targets, except for potentially getting it at a bargain purchase price. In this case, because we're not going to pay the ask, we'll go in and give them a price point. It's going to be somewhere around 80 cents on the dollar, and that's going to get us the IRR that we need to get to and the cash on cash, but it's unlikely they're going to accept. And our understanding is that they have offers somewhere around about $10 million over what we are going to offer. So good luck to those people, and that'll be a great comp for us for our properties, and I wish them the best of luck on this one. So that'll be it on this one.